Hello, I'm Doug Kay, and in this video for the Arcanum, I want to talk about a technique of street shooting which I call using stages. You know, most good photographs tell a story, and using a stage is really just another way to tell a story. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to create the plot of the story ahead of time and simply wait for the lead character to come into the frame. This is particularly good for those of you who are either new to street photography or struggle with street photography because you're uncomfortable with approaching strangers, engaging them, taking their pictures, and so forth. So we'll get into talking about stages in just a moment. But first, I want to give you a sense of where stages fit into the context of other styles of street photography. Take a look at this image. Here's a street photograph. It was taken from a street, of a street. It's a shot that I took in Havana, Cuba about a year ago. There are no people in this shot. Some people might say this isn't really street photography, that it's architectural or urban, but let's call it street photography for the sake of argument. But the key here is that there are no people in it. This is sort of one extreme of street photography. Now take a look at this image. Well, you might say this isn't street photography either because it's actually inside this woman's home, also in Havana, by the way. But at this other extreme, I spent a lot of time getting to know this woman and speaking with her, meeting her family. And even though I didn't speak Spanish, I had an interpreter with me, but I got to know her even before the topic of taking her photograph came up. I asked permission, of course, to take the photograph. So this is the other extreme. Now here's another one, also taken from the same trip to Havana, Cuba. These trombone players are street musicians. That means, of course, they're fairly easy to photograph. I recommend people who are nervous or anxious about working with strangers, you can always start with street performers because they're essentially there to interact with you. In this case, I didn't have an interpreter. They didn't speak English. I don't speak Spanish. And the whole shot was arranged with nothing more than smiles, gestures, and nods. But again, this is another type of street photography. Now here's another type. This is what I would call the stealth type of photography. In this case, I didn't interact with this person at all. I didn't ask his permission. I didn't ask permission for the person whose hand is coming into the frame from the right-hand edge. I happen to use a regular camera for this, but I could have, shot from the hip. I could have tried to disguise my camera, used a silent shutter, and so forth. I didn't have to in this case. But this is what I would call stealthy street photography. Now, I'm not a fan of that. I think this is the type that makes me the most uncomfortable. I don't like to take pictures of people without them knowing about it, at least not. You'll see stages are a little bit different from that. But in this case, it was just sort of a quick shoot from the hip kind of picture. Now, here's another image taken on that same trip to Cuba. I have quite a few, I guess, today from Cuba. This is a street portrait. In this case, I met this woman. I wasn't able to communicate with her because of the language differences, but we did interact and sort of look at each other, and she made it clear that it was okay if I took her picture. I ended up showing it to her on the back of the camera, and she seemed to like it. But this is a street portrait, and this is done again with permission and with some degree of interaction. So those are some of the styles and techniques of street photography. I wanted to show them to you to give you the context of where stages really fit into the big picture. Particularly, as I said, if you're getting started and you feel awkward about going up to strangers and engaging them, you want to have people in your images, but because of your lack of experience or perhaps your lack of social skills, it may not be something you're comfortable with. So here's the idea of a stage. This is a shot that I took in Coconut Grove, Florida. And I came across this interesting piece of art, a photograph on a wall. I was very intrigued not only with the photograph, but with the white space in the upper right corner. And I set it up as a stage. And I simply waited for the right person to come in. I didn't know who that person was going to be, of course. But I was sure somebody interesting would come into the shot. And this was probably within 2 minutes of me setting up to take this shot. And so I got the shot. I got this person exactly in the position I wanted them to be relative to the other items in the shot. And that's it. One way that a lot of people get started with stages is in a shot like this, where you find some maybe commercial art, particularly commercial art that has people in it, that is parallel to your film plane. So you've got this very sort of flat, straight-on shot. So using bold advertising art is a way to do it also. Again, you're telling a story here. You may not quite know what the story is. The story depends to some extent on who walks into the frame. But here's an example of people in the background with certain expressions, and they're looking at the person in the foreground. Are they? Aren't they? It's hard to say. But again, you're looking for the interesting contrast or similarity. For example, here's another shot from Cuba. I was particularly taken, obviously, with the bright yellow color, and I wanted to show not the contrast, but I wanted to show the similarity between the brightly colored buildings and some of the brightly colored clothes that people wear. So I actually have a high contrast image. There's a lot of color contrast, but yet there's also a lot of similarity between the wall, the woman's dress, and the child's blue clothing. Of course, it didn't hurt that I took it at a really nice time of day, so I got the great shadows and the texture on the wall. So when you want to shoot with a stage, one of the things to do is compose your shot first. You don't have to use a tripod, but compose the shot and imagine where the person is going to be in the frame. Pre-focus for what you want. Decide what should be in focus. Do you want the person in the frame to be in focus? Do you want the background to be in focus? Do you want them both to be in focus? Figure out where's the perfect position for that person in the frame. Do that ahead of time. What I do typically is also switch to manual mode because I don't want the person walking into the frame to change my exposure, my ISO, anything like that. So I will switch to manual mode, settle my parameters, maybe take a test shot with nobody in the frame, and then just wait. Now here's an example of a shot in which I took advantage of the depth of field. I decided that I wanted a person in the foreground to be in sharp focus, but I wanted the person on the poster, I wanted the model in the background to be slightly soft. I wanted to have that sort of dreamy, ethereal effect. So I chose an aperture that would give me sharp foreground, slightly soft background. I also want you to take a look at what we call micro-composition in this image. If you look at the relationship between the woman in the foreground's head and the curve of the model's torso, this is something I was specifically looking for. Because I had everything pre-focused, I was in manual exposure mode, I knew what my composition was, I didn't have to move the camera, I was able to spend my time waiting for the perfect moment when my subject's head was in the perfect relationship to the body of the model behind her. Another thing I did was I specifically violated all the rules of composition and cropped off that price on the left side where it says $9.99. I wanted it to be a little vague. Is it $9.99 or is it $19.99 or is it $29.99? Because there's a different story there. And I think the fact that you don't really know what the price is of the items on the rack gives you a little something to think about, which I sort of enjoy. Here's another shot in which micro-composition plays an important role. It was very important to me that the cherry picker basket not quite touch the arch of the doorway. It was very important that the subject who's walking from left to right here not touch either the doorway or the cherry picker itself. I got lucky with this particular person because of his posture, the fact that he's pulling a suitcase. So here we have a very mechanical background. We have angles, sharp curves, and so forth, and then the softness of the human form. And it's that contrast and the shape of this person's posture that really makes this image work in particular. Now, not all of your images need to have a flat background. You can also go to backgrounds that have angles or depth to a wide variety, I would say. In this case, this was a shot taken in a hotel in San Francisco, and I think the shot would be nothing without these people. It would just be these angular balconies, if you will. But the fact that you have these sort of blurry people walking through really adds, again, that human touch, the softness to the hard architectural perspective. And it's important that for this particular image, it's important that there are two groups of people and that they don't know that the other ones exist. It really makes it sort of an interesting story. Not only do you not need your background to be flat and parallel to your camera, you also can be looking up or down. For example, here's a shot in the San Francisco Public Library looking down on the stacks of books. The shot has a lot of depth. I used a fairly wide angle lens. I was really careful to make sure that the camera was straight. I knew I'd have a lot of distortion, but I decided to make that part of this picture. Again, pictures of books on shelves, it's not an interesting picture until the person comes in, and I even got a guy with white shoes. I mean, how lucky can I get, right? But that's the idea here, is that, again, it's a static background. It's a stage, and my performer just walks in, and he's the star of the picture. You also don't need to have a complete person enter your frame. Here's an example of a sculpture in the De Young Museum in San Francisco. And I was taken with the very angular aspect of this, if you will, and also the fact that it's pure white, but because of the light, I get a range of tonalities from whites through various shades of gray. But it just was nothing by itself. What I wanted was, again, a human element. Now, I knew, given that I was shooting down on this sculpture, I wasn't going to get a full person. What I wanted to do was just get the legs and feet of somebody. And I did. I got someone here. And what I like about this is that as you look at that person, not only does the person, again, add the softness, the human form to this very angular composition, but you sort of ask yourself, well, who is that person? What's the person like? How old is the person? What's the gender of that person? What's their story? And it adds interest to this otherwise ridiculous image. If you shot just the sculpture, you'd say, well, why would you bother? Here's one of my favorites, and I would call this a stage in many ways. This is the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and there is just this gorgeous, gorgeous light that comes in from the skylight in the lobby and filters down for, I think, 3 different levels. And I was taken with, again, the tonalities, the range from the very bright white of the column all the way into the dark shadows around the stairwell. And then you have this fabric on the right side, this fabric that's actually made up, I think, of human hair. So I composed the shot. I decided I wanted to emphasize these tonalities, so I got the exposure just the way I wanted it to. But again, I needed something. What I clearly needed was a person in my frame. Well, I didn't have to wait for more than a couple of minutes, and this woman walked in. Not only did she go to the perfect spot in the frame, but she actually looked up towards the light. I couldn't have done better if I had asked her to. She had no idea I was there. I took the picture. She'll never see it. I don't know who she is, but I just love this picture. I love the way it worked out. Again, what's important is pick your background, get all set up for the shot, and wait. Here's another shot from the De Young Museum in San Francisco. This is a spot that I can go back to over and over and over again. This is on the rooftop tower of the museum, and you're looking out over San Francisco. Again, you've got the light, you've got the architectural angles, you've got this terrific reflection on the floor, and there are tourists or museum visitors that are coming in and out of this picture all day long. I really need to go back because there are many, many opportunities to get really interesting people, in this case shot in full silhouette. I don't need to see anybody's face to tell the story that I want to tell here. And the subjects in your street photography don't have to be human subjects. Here's an example, again from Havana, of an old car. Now, one of the problems in Havana is that old cars are everywhere, and that everybody takes the pictures of them, and they all sort of look the same. So the challenge is, how do you interpret the old American cars in Cuba in a way that you haven't seen before? I decided to use a stage. In this case, my stage was a puddle that I found on the street. And I noticed that cars were driving past this puddle, different positions, but I decided that telling the story through the puddle would be an interesting way to look at it, particularly with the post-processing that you see here, in which the puddle shows a sort of more saturated, more vibrant view of the car than it really has. So I set up my camera, again, handheld, picked my puddle, and I waited. Some cars were too far away. Some cars weren't interesting enough. Some cars splashed through the puddle and got me all wet. So I was here for about 20 minutes waiting for the right car in the right position. And finally, this 52 Chevy came by, and that's how I got this picture. But again, you don't need human subjects to use a stage. One of my favorite stages is people movers. That can be escalators. It can be walkways in airports, things like that. One of the great things to do is to position yourself at the top of an escalator and have these people just come up and pop into the frame. Again, you pre-compose, you pre-focus, you set your exposure, and you never know quite what you're going to get. Now, in this case, I love this picture. I love the relationship between the two people. This guy was not particularly happy about having his picture taken, but there wasn't a whole lot he could do. I was almost in his way. I had to step out of his way, and they just walked on past me. But I have done this type of thing many times, just getting people as they emerge from some lower level and up into my frame. And not all stages have to be in strictly urban environments as well. I've seen some terrific landscapes that were composed by setting up the shot and then simply waiting for a person with the perfect red parka to walk into the appropriate spot and captured there. Here's an example of one that isn't particularly urban. I went to the Golden Gate Bridge frequently, and this is one of the favorite locations. On this day, the fog happened to be just right for this shot. I set up. I knew that there was a landing where people would be going. Tourists show up there all the time. And I simply sat there with my camera and waited until a couple of people showed up making just the right gesture. And that's how I made this photograph. And here's one last example of using a stage in street photography. Sometimes you come across a stage and the person or people are already on the stage. Sometimes you don't even have to wait for them to enter the frame. In this case, again, at the DeYoung Museum in San Francisco, I looked down from a landing onto the lower lobby, and there were 4 people already on my stage just waiting for me. I did have to wait a few moments until a couple of them changed their positions and their postures slightly, but this is a case where the stage and the complete cast of characters were ready for me, and all I had to do was take the picture. So don't give up that opportunity as well. So whether you're a novice or a very experienced street shooter, the next time you go out to shoot, give stages a try. They're a lot of fun. I think you'll find they're very rewarding. And if you are a novice, you'll find they're a great way to get started and to build up your confidence. Until then, I look forward to seeing your images. This is Doug K. for the Arcanum.